Emily sat at the grand dining table in Olivia's luxurious Houston home, surrounded by warm laughter and the clinking of fine china. It was their monthly family brunch, a tradition she once found comforting. But now, an unsettling tension filled the air, a tension only she seemed to notice. In front of her, a delicate porcelain cup of coffee steamed, its aroma thick with something metallic, something unnatural. "Don't you want to try it, honey?" her husband, Daniel, asked, his smile stretched too tight, his fingers tapping against the table. Olivia, his sister, sat across from them, watching with an eerie intensity, absent-mindedly stirring her own untouched cup. Emily's stomach twisted. She had learned long ago to trust her instincts. And right now, they were screaming. This wasn't the first time she felt uneasy after a meal prepared by Olivia. The stomach cramps, the dizzy spells, the blurred vision, all incidents brushed off as coincidences. But how many coincidences did it take before it became a pattern? Feigning a casual chuckle, she lifted the cup to her lips, letting the heat brush against her skin without taking a sip. Daniel and Olivia exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. There it was, the confirmation she needed. Her pulse thundered in her ears. But she forced herself to remain calm. "Oh, I forgot to send an important email," she announced suddenly, fumbling with her phone. As she stood, she stumbled just enough to make it seem accidental, reaching out to steady herself, and in that fleeting moment, she switched her cup with Olivia's. A tense silence followed. Olivia smirked, unaware of the trap she had just set for herself. Emily walked away, heart hammering, resisting the urge to look back. Now, she just had to wait. From the study doorway, she watched as Olivia lifted the cup and took a sip. A single moment stretched into eternity. Then, Olivia's fingers trembled. She set the cup down abruptly, her face paling. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "Something's wrong." Emily's breath caught. The truth was finally about to reveal itself. This version amplifies the suspense and tension while keeping it concise. "Let me know if you'd like any tweaks." The air in the dining room was thick with tension, though only Emily seemed to notice. The golden morning light streamed through Olivia's lavish Houston home, casting elegant shadows across the table. The clinking of silverware and quiet laughter filled the space. But Emily's focus was locked on the steaming cup of coffee in front of her. It smelled wrong, metallic, bitter. "Go on, try it," Daniel urged, his voice too smooth, too controlled. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with something unreadable. Across from them, Olivia swirled her own untouched coffee, watching Emily with a smug, knowing smile. Emily forced a pleasant chuckle. "You've been so thoughtful lately," she murmured, wrapping her fingers around the cup. Her hands were steady, but her pulse was a roaring storm beneath her skin. How many times had she been sick after meals at Olivia's house? The unexplained stomach cramps, the dizzy spells, the week she spent in urgent care after drinking tea prepared by Olivia herself. All waved away as food poisoning. Bad luck, but Emily knew better now. She brought the cup close to her lips, pretending to inhale deeply. Olivia and Daniel exchanged a fleeting glance, quick, but unmistakable, a silent confirmation that something was terribly wrong. Emily's heart pounded. She had seconds to act. "Oh, shoot," she gasped suddenly, grabbing her phone. "Work emergency, so clumsy of me." She stumbled, just enough to create a distraction, reaching out to steady herself. In one fluid motion, she switched her cup with Olivia's. No one noticed. With a gracious smile, Emily excused herself and slipped toward the study, her hands trembling as she gripped the doorframe. From the doorway, she watched. Olivia lifted the cup to her lips, took a sip, then froze. A flicker of confusion, then fear. Her fingers twitched, her expression twisted. "Daniel," she rasped, her voice uneven. "Something's wrong." Emily exhaled slowly. The game had changed, and she was finally in control. This version builds suspense, urgency, and psychological tension, making the moment gripping and cinematic. "Let me know if you'd like any changes." The silence in the hospital waiting room was suffocating. Emily sat motionless, her fingers curled tightly around her phone, replaying the events from earlier that morning. The fear in Olivia's eyes, the confusion in Daniel's voice, the truth unraveling like a tightly wound thread finally snapping. Across the hall, behind a glass window, Olivia lay in a hospital bed, her face pale and contorted with pain. She had been the one to take the poisoned coffee meant for Emily. Family of Olivia Carter? A nurse's voice cut through the tense air. Emily stood, her movements sharp and controlled, though her heart pounded against her ribs. I'm her sister-in-law, she replied, her voice even. How is she? The nurse hesitated. She's stable, but the doctors found concerning substances in her bloodwork. The toxicology report shows traces of a pharmaceutical compound not meant for consumption. A voice interrupted. Emily turned to see Dr. Phillips, her expression grim. We need to talk. Emily nodded, following her down the corridor, her grip tightening around her phone. She had proof. The confession, the messages, the voice recordings of Olivia and Daniel discussing how to slow her down. As they reached a quiet corner, Dr. Phillips lowered her voice. Miss Bennett, we ran tests comparing the substances in Olivia's system with those from your previous hospital visits. They match. A slow chill crept up Emily's spine. So, you're saying, these were not accidents? Dr. Phillips confirmed. This was deliberate poisoning over months, possibly longer. A sharp voice cut through their conversation. Emily. She turned to see Daniel approaching, his face slick with sweat, his usual confidence replaced by something desperate. You have to listen to me, he pleaded. Olivia, she didn't mean for it to go this far. Neither did I. Emily stepped back, tilting her head. The man who had tried to poison her was now begging for mercy. She exhaled slowly, raising her phone. Then why don't you explain that to the police? This rewrite adds tension, suspense, and a psychological shift, making Emily's growing power and control over the situation clear. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that crackled with tension, thick with the weight of impending judgment. Emily sat rigid, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes locked on the two people who had once been her family. Daniel and Olivia, shackled, pale, their perfect facades finally shattered. The prosecutor stepped forward, holding up a thick stack of documents. Your Honor, the evidence against the defendants is overwhelming. We have text messages detailing their plans to incapacitate Mrs. Bennett before key business meetings. We have voice recordings where they discuss dosages. We have medical reports confirming a pattern of systematic poisoning spanning over 6 months. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Emily felt no fear now, only cold, steady resolve. Daniel's lawyer tried to argue. My client deeply regrets his actions. He was manipulated, pressured into this by objection. The prosecutor cut in. Mr. Carter was fully aware of his actions. Let's not rewrite history. The judge held up a hand, silencing the room. Then, he turned his sharp gaze on Olivia and Daniel. The premeditated nature of these crimes, the judge intoned, leaves no room for leniency. A sob broke from Olivia's lips. Daniel sat motionless, his jaw clenched. He had spent years believing he was untouchable. Now, he was just another convict waiting for a sentence. Emily felt her pulse slow. This was the end of the nightmare. Both defendants are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison without parole. The judge declared. The gavel hit the wood with a sharp crack. A strangled noise came from Daniel. Part protest, part despair. Olivia buried her face in her hands. Emily stood, feeling the weight finally lift. As she turned to leave, Daniel's voice shot through the courtroom. Emily, please. She stopped, but didn't turn. You tried to destroy me, she said softly. Instead, you destroyed yourselves. Then, with steady steps, she walked out, leaving them to rot in the prison of their own making. This rewrite builds suspense, courtroom drama, and Emily's ultimate triumph, making it a satisfying and dramatic climax. Let me know if you'd like any refinements. The echoes of the judge's final words still rang in Emily's ears as she stepped out of the courthouse. The crisp autumn air a stark contrast to the suffocating weight of the past year. She had won. Daniel and Olivia were behind bars, their carefully constructed lies collapsing around them. But the scars they left behind were deep. She took a steadying breath, barely noticing the reporters shouting her name. Ms. Bennett, any comments on the verdict? Emily didn't stop. This moment wasn't for the public, it was for her. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman who had endured and conquered. The weak, trusting Emily was gone. In her place was someone sharper, stronger, a survivor who refused to be anyone's victim. Her phone buzzed. An email. The Henderson account, the very contract Olivia had tried to steal from her, was not only renewed but expanded. Emily's firm was now the leading marketing strategist for one of the most prestigious clients in the industry. She exhaled. Poetic justice. The next morning, she walked into the grand opening of her firm's new headquarters. The sleek, glass-paneled building stood as a monument to everything she had built despite the people who tried to bring her down. She stepped onto the stage, scanning the crowd, employees, clients, friends. No more shadows of the past. No more fear. As she delivered her speech, her voice was strong, unwavering. Success isn't about avoiding betrayal. It's about rising above it. It's about knowing who you are, even when the world tries to break you. She spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Detective Mendoza, giving her a knowing nod. Emily smiled. This was the best revenge, not just surviving, but thriving. As applause erupted around her, she felt it deep in her bones. She wasn't just reclaiming her life. She was rewriting it, and this time, no one would stand in her way. This rewrite captures Emily's triumph, resilience, and the ultimate poetic justice she achieves, making it a powerful and satisfying Band 5 resolution. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. The soft hum of chatter filled the grand ballroom, where the Nashville Business Leaders Gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light. But Emily felt a deeper glow, one that came from within. She had won. As she sipped her champagne, the weight of the past year settled around her like a storm that had finally passed. James and Olivia were locked away, their twisted ambitions shattered. But the real victory wasn't their downfall, it was hers. She had survived. She had risen. And now, she stood stronger than ever. Her company had flourished beyond expectations, securing the most prestigious clients in the industry. Tonight, she wasn't just another businesswoman, she was the keynote speaker. As she stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She took in the faces before her, some familiar, some strangers, but all of them listening. This moment was hers. Success isn't about avoiding adversity. She began, her voice steady, yet charged with emotion. It's about standing tall, even when those closest to you try to bring you down. It's about learning who to trust, and who to leave behind. From the back of the room, Detective Mendoza gave her a small nod. The woman who had believed her when no one else did. The woman who had helped bring the truth to light. Emily's gaze flickered across the room. No James, no Olivia, just a sea of people who respected her, who saw her for what she had become, a force to be reckoned with. She let the moment settle before delivering the final words that had been burning inside her since that fateful brunch. There is no greater revenge, she said, than proving your enemies were never strong enough to destroy you. Thunderous applause erupted, but Emily barely heard it. Because for the first time in years, she was truly free, and she was just getting started. This rewrite delivers a powerful, triumphant conclusion, wrapping up the suspense with Emily's ultimate revenge, her success. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks. The courtroom was eerily silent as the judge's gavel struck the wooden podium. The sound echoed like a death knell, sealing the fate of James and Olivia. Guilty. Emily gripped the edge of her chair, feeling a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. The trial had lasted weeks, each day dragging her back into the nightmare she had barely survived. But now, it was over. James and Olivia stood motionless, their faces drained of color. Olivia, once so smug and calculating, trembled as the judge continued. The evidence of premeditation is overwhelming. The systematic poisoning, the detailed notes, this was not an accident. This was a crime fueled by greed and jealousy. James tried to speak, but his lawyer silenced him. Not that it mattered. The damage was done. The texts, the recordings, the stolen compounds, it was all laid bare. The jury had taken less than an hour to reach their verdict. Emily inhaled deeply, allowing the reality to sink in. They had tried to take everything from her. Her career, her reputation, her life. But instead, they had lost everything. As James and Olivia were led away in handcuffs, Olivia's eyes met hers. Gone was the arrogance. In its place was a desperate, silent plea. Emily held her gaze for a moment before turning away. No mercy. Not today. Outside, the cold autumn air felt different, lighter, freer. Detective Mendoza approached, her expression unreadable. It's done, she said. They won't be able to hurt you again. Emily nodded, but she already knew. They had lost their power over her the moment she stopped being afraid. Later that night, she sat in her office, sipping wine, surrounded by the thriving business they tried to destroy. The framed screenshot of James's cruel text still hung on the wall. A reminder of how much she had overcome. He thought he had written her ending, but she had turned it into her greatest beginning. This rewrite heightens the drama and suspense, ending with a powerful reflection on Emily's resilience and triumph. Let me know if you'd like any changes. The judge's voice rang through the tense courtroom, slicing through the air like a blade. Guilty on all counts. The gavel slammed down, final and unforgiving. Emily exhaled, gripping the edge of the polished wooden bench. She had braced herself for this moment, but nothing prepared her for the sight before her. James and Olivia, once so smug, so untouchable, were now nothing more than shattered remnants of their former selves. James staggered, his mouth opening as if to argue, but no words came. Olivia, always the master manipulator, clutched the railing in front of her, her carefully composed mask crumbling. The evidence is overwhelming, the judge continued. This was not a mistake. This was a calculated attempt to eliminate a competitor, to destroy a woman who trusted you. His gaze was sharp as it fell on them. And now, you will face the consequences. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Emily sat frozen, her pulse pounding, memories flashing through her mind, the nausea, the hospital visits, the near misses with death. Every moment of agony they had orchestrated. And yet, here she was, alive, thriving, watching them fall. The bailiff approached to handcuff James first. He didn't resist. His shoulders slumped. The fight drained from his body. Olivia, however, twisted in desperation. Emily, please, she gasped, her voice raw. You have to believe me. It was never supposed to be like this. Emily stood, stepping forward, locking eyes with the woman who had spent months trying to destroy her. The poisoner, the liar, the betrayer. She tilted her head, lips curving into the faintest of smiles. You're right, Olivia. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You were supposed to win, weren't you? Olivia's breath hitched, realization hitting like a slap. The last shred of her illusion shattered. Emily turned away, walking out into the crisp evening air. She was done with them. And for the first time in years, she was free. The moment the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted into hushed gasps. The tension so thick it felt suffocating. James Carter and Olivia Reynolds, guilty on all counts. The gavel struck like a thunderclap, sealing their fate. Emily exhaled slowly, steadying herself as a wave of satisfaction coursed through her veins. She had fought too long, suffered too much, to let this moment slip by without absorbing every ounce of its weight. Justice had finally caught up to them. James swayed slightly, his face paling as if the reality of his downfall had just struck him like a physical blow. His arrogance had vanished, replaced with something Emily had never seen before, fear. Olivia, always composed, always in control, now trembled, her carefully curated facade cracking apart. Your Honor, Olivia rasped, desperation leaking into her voice. This has all been a misunderstanding. You don't understand what she's capable of. Enough. The judge interjected, his voice a sharp blade of finality. The evidence speaks for itself. You orchestrated a campaign of deceit, manipulation, and attempted harm against a woman who once trusted you. His gaze darkened. And now, you will face the consequences. Emily had spent months unraveling their twisted schemes, the carefully concealed poisons, the sabotage disguised as accidents, the lies whispered into every ear willing to listen. But she had been smarter. She had documented everything, planned meticulously, turned their own game against them. The bailiff moved toward James, cuffs in hand. James recoiled. Wait, just wait, he stammered, looking wildly around as if someone might save him. His gaze landed on Emily, and for the first time, he begged, Emily, please, we can fix this. She stepped forward, her voice cool, unwavering. You already did. Olivia let out a choked sob as the metal snapped around her wrists. James slumped, defeated. Emily turned away, walking toward the courthouse doors. As the heavy doors swung open, sunlight spilled over her like a victory crown. She inhaled deeply, feeling something she hadn't in years. Freedom. The world seemed to hold its breath as the judge delivered the final ruling. James Carter and Olivia Reynolds, sentenced to 25 years without parole. The courtroom, a sea of gasps and hushed whispers, became a silent stage where justice had finally taken center. Emily sat still, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. Her heartbeat steady. She had won. James's face twisted in disbelief, his usual smugness replaced by sheer panic. His jaw clenched, his hands gripping the table as if he could hold onto the life that was slipping away from him. Olivia, ever the puppet master, shook her head, murmuring under her breath, "No, this isn't happening." But it was. Emily had spent months preparing for this moment, piecing together every lie. Every betrayal, every carefully plotted attempt on her life. The poison, the staged accidents, the sabotage that nearly cost her everything. But in the end, they had underestimated her. They had thought she was weak. They were wrong. As the bailiffs approached, James turned to Emily, his desperation spilling out in frantic, whispered pleas. "Emily, you don't have to do this. You loved me once, didn't you?" His voice cracked, his mask of control slipping for the first time. Emily leaned forward, meeting his eyes with a steady, cold stare. "And you tried to kill me." Repeatedly, she let the words settle between them like a final nail in his coffin. Olivia let out a wild, guttural scream as the cuffs snapped around her wrists. "You'll regret this, Emily. You'll." Emily tilted her head, a smirk ghosting across her lips. "No, Olivia, the only thing I regret is not seeing through you sooner." The doors swung open, and Emily rose, walking toward the blinding light of freedom. She could hear James's panicked protests fading behind her, Olivia's curses turning into sobs. They were done. She stepped into the sunlight. Her victory absolute. They had tried to destroy her. Instead, she had buried them,